I would like to welcome Mihai Alisie now. He's founder of AKASHA and co-founder of Ethereum and founder of Bitcoin Magazine, so he's very, very innovative. Just come on. AKASHA is a new type of social networks. That's his idea for the future of the internet, and I think he will tell us much more about that in a few seconds. Welcome.
So, hello and guten Tag Heidelberg. I'm very excited to be here and deeply honored. This is, in my opinion, truly one of those standing on the shoulders of giants scenarios. And I hope to showcase some of the applications, the work of some of the Heidelberg laureates in the field of mathematics and computer science have enabled. And I'd just like to make clear from the beginning that this is not going to be a presentation about cryptocurrency. I think Demelza Hayes from the University of Liechtenstein made a great job at covering that angle. This is going to be more about the deeper implications and applications of this technology. And if you look at the bigger picture, we are now approaching the first decade since blockchain technology, so to say, has entered our reality. And I think the laureates in this audience, or those that will watch online, have contributed greatly. And today, it's almost as these applications and the stuff that we are able to build on top of their work is a ripple through time of some of the work that they have done decades ago, like, for example, elliptic curve cryptography. So my goal today here is to share some of our story as AKASHA, the foundation, our research areas, which I hope will be interesting for some of you, and also invite you to collaborate. This is not by no means a charted territory, on the contrary. So this is going to be an odyssey of discovery for everyone. Like on this note, I don't think there is such a thing as a blockchain expert yet, because it's too early. And that being said, one of the things that made us want to start on this road is that we find ourselves today in this society, and Dexter touched a bit about the implications, or the deeper implications in our daily lives, where we have outsourced our privacy, our freedom of expression, and collective memory as a species to a handful of corporations. And I'm talking about planetary scale here. And this would be an overly simplified view of the interactions we have on a daily basis. You know, you post something on Facebook, you read an email, but at all times you are going through at least one entity. In most cases, we are talking about tens or even hundreds of third parties that access and monetize in all kinds of ways your data. And to kind of, you know, showcase a dark side of this, like what happens when you exchange that data, when you post that message, when you add that reaction, Facebook, and this is not very well known and surprised me, that actually has a pattern that can predict when you'll die. So this also kind of makes you wonder, like Google and all these big corporations, where this is going as an information society and what it means for our future and the children that will follow, that, you know, today are born with smartphones in their hands, so to say, and how will their future look like, especially when you add AI to the picture. And that being said, AKASHA is a nonprofit born at the intersection of blockchain and collective intelligence, and I'll touch about on the collective intelligence a bit later. And we seek to advance the design and application of technologies for sustainable systems at city, country, and planetary scale. So it's all about like localizing and trying to find the solution in the right context, but also having it interoperable at a global scale. And we're doing this because we want to see a world where human rights are defaults rather than features. And I'm talking about things like freedom of speech and privacy, a world where people own their online lives and identities, so not like a service that grants you access to the service and which can be revoked at any time. And a world where your human relations, so to say, your social graph is not owned by a corporation, which again, like your friends that you're talking with and you're exchanging information, at any point if Facebook or whatever social network you're using that is centralized can determine if you are still able to contact your friends, which is not okay, right? Kind of makes you wonder what kind of world we'll leave to the next generation. And I hope with this work and the work that will continue to go on in this space, we will leave a better world, to be proud of. Like, yes, I remember Facebook maybe 10 years from now. And to give you a bit of a context, my story in this space began in 2011 when I discovered Bitcoin. And it was one of those moments like, is this real? And when I was trying to understand the technology and if this is a real innovation or scam, I spotted the need for a coherent source of information, both for people that are trying to learn about it and also for journalists that were trying to find someone to talk with, like what is this thing, how does it work? And a few weeks later, after I made an impression, okay, this is real, I got in touch with Vitalik Buterin, and then that was kind of the early days of Bitcoin Magazine. And my story continues in 2012, where I served as editor-in-chief for the magazine. And in this time, I think this was an invaluable opportunity to immerse ourselves in this space and to see it from inside out, not from outside in. And that gave us the opportunity to meet interesting people, share interesting ideas, and see many projects rise and fall in this period of time. It also kind of gave us an idea of what this technology can do, what it cannot do, where reality meets expectations. It's not going to solve all our problems, but maybe it can help us solve some, at least. And this is how in 2013, the idea behind Ethereum started to take shape in Vitalik's mind. And I joined him in this project as a co-founder. And it's worth mentioning that Ethereum as a concept came in an era where most of the blockchains were single use case. So if you take Bitcoin as the first example of this, the use case of that blockchain is to be decentralized digital currency, right? And in this case, we proposed the idea of a general purpose blockchain that would liberate and empower developers to co-create on top of a shared infrastructure. This kind of points back to internet and how you have all these various devices from phones to laptops able to communicate with each other. In the same way, if you'd have a blockchain ecosystem where everything is fragmented, it will be harder to intercommunicate between them, right? So that's like the synergy kind of core value proposition of the project. In 2014, I landed in Switzerland together with a group of people where we set the base for Ethereum Switzerland. It was a search in the early days. We tried to find the right jurisdiction for obvious reasons. It's still gray area in most. But luckily the canton of Zug was open-minded enough and it was very welcoming. And that gave us jurisdiction that we could call home, so to say. And fast forwarding a couple of months in, and I suppose you know the slide that the Melsa showed with the 2,000 ICOs and coins. Like, I'm sorry. We kind of started this. It wasn't called an ICO back in the day, but we were trying to find a way in which we can raise resources to pay developers and people that would help us to actually make the dream a reality, so to say. And this is how in 42 days, Ethereum, and if you look at it, this is still an ongoing, so what's on number one, but Ethereum actually set a world record. Approximately $18.5 million raised through a peer-to-peer currency, Bitcoin in this case, to build the next wave of a digital infrastructure. So it's almost like a cypherpunk Inception movie where it's like the digital economy is building itself out. And also to frame this was happening in a period of time where we had this vibrant community of people self-organizing around the world, so this was not top-down planned, and just sharing knowledge among each other. The social learning was a very important part of this. And 10,000 members in 2014. And now going to 2015, in July 30, we had the Ethereum blockchain Genesis, which moved Ethereum as a project from the dreamland to a platform where other people can build their dreams. And also like to make a connection with the first presentation, like if we look now, like fast forwarding 3 years, like this is the top 10 of the highest crowdfunded projects. And you see like from 18.5 millions, like the numbers jumped like for billions or hundreds of millions. But like what's interesting and what I'd like to attract your attention is that 7 out of 10 are done on Ethereum. So this is one of the lowest hanging fruits of this technology, but it enabled people to raise funds for projects in a new way, bypassing the need to go through a centrally, a VC or other setup that involves a third party. And in this case, like in the 3 years that have passed, we have now surpassed 1 million people self-organizing around the world. So 1,150,000 people around the world, like epic. Right, 100x. And going back to 2015, this was when Ethereum was launched. I also told Vitalik and the rest that I was always excited about the things that can be built with this thing. So I never saw like the launch of the blockchain as a finish line, more like a starting point. And this is when AKASHA as an application, as a decentralized social network, started to take shape. And in 2016, we launched the alpha version, which this is a preview of what it was able to do. Basically, what makes this application different from other applications is that it was running completely decentralized. So basically, if someone would install this application on their computer, in the background, they would install an Ethereum node and an IPFS node. And IPFS being the interplanetary file system, which acts as a complementary piece of the puzzle to store the information, and the blockchain being as more of an index. And as you see, since we're using blockchain for identities and people usernames, every identity is also a wallet. So this opens very intriguing ways for people to not exchange only status messages and posts, but also wealth in their social network. So this adds another dimension to social crowdfunding of sorts. And then going to 2017, we unveiled our beta, which is an iteration. We learned, like we looked at the alpha, okay, we can do better. But the purpose of the alpha was to prove that this idea can actually work, to have something that does not rely on servers. And the iteration was going more towards parallel experience. And in this particular video, we also explored the idea of having a multi-layered curation. So it's not like you have just a black and white approach, like you have the thumbs up, thumbs down, but you have actually a spectrum of opinions that build when you overlaid some sort of emergent picture of our reality. And in the meantime, in this time while we were focused on our own thing, the ecosystem around Ethereum and people building various things, and not only Ethereum, the blockchain ecosystem as a whole, has underwent like a sort of Cambrian explosion of things. And if we zoom in, hopefully let's see if this is visible, we have a bunch of projects in all sorts of areas, from exchanges and trading, financial services, GovTech, wallets, and if we move down, we have prediction markets, utilities, insurance and healthcare, legal. So as you can see, many, many, many areas. And somewhere here on the right, we also have, let's see if this works. We have also AKASHA as a social network on this area, right? But while we saw this unfolding, so it was like a co-evolution of sorts, right? The platform on top of which we were building was also evolving as we were moving forward. And we understood the need of shifting our understanding of what we are doing, taking again a couple of steps back and looking at what we actually want to achieve. And this made us understand that we need to move beyond like thinking of the application as a social networking app, and rather putting it into an ecosystem view, because this was already kind of a network of sorts. But what was lacking was this interconnective tissue that will leverage the synergy of this ecosystem. So now, even if these applications and all these projects could talk to each other, they're not very good at doing that. So in this concept, the AKASHA kind of starts to begin morphing into like this emergent framework rather than something overlaid on top. And moving on, something that summarizes to some extent the shift from the current paradigm to the next one is this Reedy Centralization. So the early ideas of the internet and so on all revolved around having no central point of failure. But the hyper-centralization we saw manifesting, Facebook, billions of people, Google, billions of people in half a planet, have led to this like super, I don't know how to call it, like an information Dead Star of sorts, right? That is not necessarily contributing back to society. And if you have that pyramid of data, information, knowledge, wisdom, like our society as a whole, even if it's an information-based society, has very little knowledge and arguably less wisdom, right? Because all that data that we are producing, all that information that we are producing is now siloed, captured, and monetized, analyzed by these corporations. And the knowledge or wisdom that is derived from that is not necessarily to the betterment of humanity, rather the betterment of the algorithms serving ads. And in this paradigm, you see the user, in the decentralized paradigm, the user as being in the control of their flows. And this involves the social networks, which can be, a social network at work, a social network at home, a social network with your friends, and then you have your own things in the house. In this context, the Internet of Things. And the user, through this identity and security layer, which could be framed as a blockchain infrastructure, but it's not like the user has to understand blockchain in order to use it, just like you don't need to understand electricity in order to turn on the light. You just press something, a button, turn on, turn off. And then this feedback, again, can happen locally on the user's device. So there's no need for that huge data center somewhere to collect that. We've moved past that stage. We all basically have supercomputers in our pockets. And to kind of give you an idea of where we're going and if there might be some overlap between our interests, our research centers around three main pillars, like what, who, and how. So when I say who, it refers to who are you? Right? Who are you? Are you delimited by your physicality, as in I'm this trillion of cells just standing here and giving this talk? Am I a trait, or is it my identity is limited to the passport my government gives me? Same with the username that you have on a social network, same with the cryptographic identity, which can be represented by a key pair. But, you have hundreds of projects that operate in this field. There are hundreds of initiatives that kind of search to break down this challenge from this perspective. But something to note here, that this is a binary universe, where you either have it or you don't. You're either in or you're out, right? But that's not really how the world works in reality. We are more like this fluid, multidimensional beings. It's not like you can be summed up to just one trait or to one passport or to one driving license, right? Or to one username. It's more like we have these separate and sometimes only overlapping circles of friends, reputation, and knowledge that we can build on top of. And this is the area where we focus. And this is an area that's not too, too popular. Hopefully this will change in the future. It's also more complex to solve. But, what's the point of researching something if it's not challenging? And when we touch on the what, and as you can see the presentation, it does not focus very much on the technology, but rather the implications and where humans and technology kind of come together. And in this case, how many of you are familiar with DAOs? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, well, not bad. I've seen a few hands. So basically a decentralized autonomous or a distributed autonomous organization is a new form of organizing for people, right? So if we look back a couple of hundreds years ago, we had the corporation as a way or a legal structure around which people, individuals, could come together towards some shared goal. Right? So in that case, it could be, a mining company which has the goal of, extracting coal from the mine, petrol, and so on. But in this case, you also have the system, which as a whole, if you look at the constitution, the laws, and all this stuff can be seen as a sort of protocol at societal level in this jurisdiction. So this is the accepted social stuff, this is what's not accepted, and we operate within that. So it's like the green light, we can go, the red light, no, you stop. So in the same way, you can define these kind of rules that help us organize and coordinate with each other. And just that instead of using, papers and complicated laws and so on, you have this ability of creating an organization where you define these laws in a transparent manner using smart contracts. By the way, how many of you are familiar with smart contracts? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, that's better. So the smart contracts are like the building block on top of Ethereum, which can be anything mathematically defined as a set of conditions. So it's like an if this, then that kind of scenario. But the main purpose here is that these organizational forms that we come up with as a society a couple of 100 years ago were all relying on one central point, a president, a CEO, a general manager. But in this scenario where everyone has connectivity, everyone has an access to being connected with the whole group, it's not so much a problem of coordination and getting people together, which was a problem a couple of 100 years ago, but not so much today. So the stakeholders, the participants in this group can all signal, like, where do you want to go? Similar to how you have the flamingo birds, like signaling with their heads, and depending on where they most point, that's where they go. So in a similar fashion, which might seem like chaotic, you can have some sort of order emerge. And that's the decentrally organized part. And now, coming back to the setup of this event, this might seem familiar to some. This is a schematic from the mathematical theory of communication, also known as the Shannon-Weaver model, which treats the communication, right? A theory of communication. And it's fantastic. This is like one of the building blocks that enabled us to build many things, from like building satellites, understanding black holes, and most of the internet and applications we use today are still built on top of this. And this works great because computers message. So when you have messages and signals that travel to this framework, this applies very well. However, when you add people, like humans, into the picture, it's almost like we're missing a piece of the puzzle. And this is where conversation theory comes into play. And again, I'd like to point out that this is like decades-old research that was done by Gordon Pask, and nowadays is continued by Paul Pangaro through his work. And in this scenario, you have a setup where the participants that use the signaling, the messaging framework, can coordinate and come together to achieve a common goal. And this is formalized. This is like one of the applications of cybernetics in the context of how humans and machines can, leverage their overlaps to increase their potential. And in this context, like putting back the blockchain, this is decades old, this is all fun and so on. But if you put back in the blockchain context, now you have this idea of a conversational DAO. So on one side, you have the transactions and people being able to signal, but you don't necessarily have the interface that would enable these participants to easily and efficiently come together and towards a common goal. And this is quite exciting. And this is a quote from Paul Pangaro that says, wealth creation has shifted from prior knowledge, so like patents, IP, and the classic, to the ability to gain new knowledge in action. Because also the world around us is like constantly shifting and accelerating in this change, right? It's a lot more fast than it was a couple of 100 years ago when we had this form of organization that might have been, okay. But these days, I think we are reaching the limits of what this form of organization can do at the planetary and, country or local scale. And also something to note, that this is taken from economy of insights, conversations as transactions. So again, putting into the context of blockchain. And to kind of wrap this up and touch also on what Dexter was talking about when it comes to data, as in something that can be applied also on the medical side, there is a question here. Is it something you own? Some people might say that. But if you look at it as something you own, you get to like some weird ethical debates, as in, you either own this jacket or you don't. I have it or you do, but not the both of us. And I think in the next iteration of what this web kind of infrastructure opens, we have to go beyond that. And we have to go towards an era where our understanding of what the data is not something we own, but something we actually are. Because from those patterns, going back to what Facebook and, like predicting when you can die, that's actually us. It's almost like a doppelganger of ourselves in a digital form. And this is why, again, privacy and encryption and this platform should, excite people, because it can empower them and, again, retake control over this whole infrastructure that was developed around us while we were sleeping or scrolling through the feed. And to wrap it up, how we can do that, self-sovereign technologies are defined as something, but there are many definitions. But one of them is that they serve you and no one else. And in the context where we explored how these entities are in the middle and exploiting basically this human desire of connecting with another, because we are social humans, social animals, and then you have like the social network as the killer application of the internet. No surprise there, right? We also can create this infrastructure where that desire of each other connecting with another is done on a peer-to-peer basis, like it was done hundreds of years ago, like it was done thousands of years ago, before we had this infrastructure developed that just captured and monetized our relations and our interactions with each other. So to put it in a nutshell, the collaboration with Paul Pangaro for us was an example how transdisciplinarity can help us, and how sometimes old research, in the decades-old research, can be applied in the new context. And in a world where things can be, everything is a remix, and sometimes old ideas in a new context can come up with new solutions, we think it's the same now. And I think we live in an age where the gap between when math is being invented and when it is being used is collapsed. So you see, we have this decades-old lag in research, like for example, elliptic curve cryptography, which is at the heart of many blockchain projects. And it's almost like we see this ripple through time, right? There was these smart guys coming, putting down equations, and now decades later, there are these cypherpunks, just stumbling upon something, yes, that can work, and then you just combine it in a way to make a meaningful application. And I think new and old mathematics and computer science can truly make a difference in years rather than decades if we come together and we explore the interest, the shared interest and shared goals we have as a group of a community, just appreciating the intellectual challenge and the curiosity in finding new solutions to sometimes old problems. And the idea here is that we invite everyone that is interested in exploring this or has some inclination towards blockchain as a tangible application in our real world to get in touch and basically to turn that beautiful mathematics into meaningful application that can truly make a difference for people around the world. Thank you.